Financial feminism, ownership, income, freedom. Financial feminism, more options, more ownership, more freedom.
Welcome back to Financial Feminism. I'm so grateful you're here today because I want to have a conversation that almost didn't happen. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I almost missed the lesson myself. Now, a few days ago, after earning my Doctor of Nursing practice degree, someone congratulated me and then they'd said something that completely caught me off guard. And they asked me, "Do you realize how few nurses ever earn a doctorate?" I smiled and then I answered honestly and said, "No, I hadn't thought about it. Actually, not once." And for years, my focus wasn't on earning a title, it wasn't on earning statistics, and it wasn't on being a part of a small percentage. My focus was much simpler than that. Finish the assignment, get through the semester, work the shift, take care of my patients, lead my team, run my businesses, raise my family, pay the bills, and wake up and do it all over again tomorrow. And I became so focused on surviving the journey that I never really stopped to appreciate what I had actually accomplished. And after that conversation, something really, really hit me that had absolutely nothing to do with nursing. I realized I had spent years building something valuable without recognizing its value itself. That stayed with me. And not just for an hour, not even just for a day, but for weeks. Because then another question came. If I could spend years earning something and still overlook its value, how many women are doing the exact same thing? Not with the doctorate, but with their lives. So today I want to talk about what I believe is one of the most expensive lies that women tell themselves. And it's a lie that's so common that we barely notice it anymore. And it sounds innocent, it sounds humble, it sounds even responsible, I guess, if you will. But it quietly steals promotions, businesses, raises, opportunities, confidence, even leadership, and eventually money. And the lie is this: I'm just a nurse. Oh, I'm just a mom. I'm just helping. I'm just doing my job. I'm just lucky. I'm just trying my best. Have you ever noticed how often we use that word? Just. And it's such a small word, but it has enormous consequences. Because every time you say just, you're shrinking something that probably deserves to be celebrated. You're reducing something that you've worked incredibly hard to build. And after enough years, you start believing your own words. And I don't think women wake up in the morning deciding to undervalue themselves. I think it happens gradually and quietly and almost invisibly, if you will. And we've become so accustomed to carrying heavy loads that eventually they just stop feeling heavy. And we become so good at problem solving, and solving them no longer feels remarkable. And we become so dependable that everyone expects it, including us. I mean, think about the nurse who has spent 20 years calming frightened families. And she thinks, well, I'm just doing my job. The teacher who changes children's lives every single year, I'm just teaching. Or the woman carrying both her children and her parents along every day and she cares for them and she takes care of them. And she says, well, I'm just doing what anyone would do. And here's one, the entrepreneur who built a business from her kitchen table. I'm just trying to make it work. No, you're not just anything. You've simply become so familiar with your own strength that you no longer recognize it. And that's dangerous because when extraordinary becomes ordinary in your own mind, you stop assigning value to it. And here's where financial feminism begins. Not with investing, not with budgeting, not with retirement accounts, and not with stock portfolios. It begins with value. Because if you don't recognize your own value, how can you possibly expect the marketplace to? And think about that for a moment. If you walked into a store and every item had no price tag, how would you know what anything was worth? You wouldn't. Someone has to establish value first. And women often walk through their careers without placing a value on what they've built. Instead, we wait. We wait for someone else to notice, someone else to promote us, someone else to compliment us, someone else to tell us we're ready, or someone else to tell us we're qualified, or even tell us that we deserve more. But what if they never do? Does that make your value disappear? Of course not. I mean, it simply means that you've been waiting for someone else to confirm something you should have already recognized years ago. And I think one of the reasons this happens is because many of us were taught to be grateful, right? And gratitude it's beautiful. And please don't misunderstand me, but somewhere along the way, gratitude became silence. Gratitude became settling, and it became accepting less. And we started believing somewhere along the line that asking for more somehow meant we weren't thankful for what we already had. And those two things are completely different. You can be grateful and still negotiate. And you can be grateful and still pursue leadership. You can be grateful and still build wealth. You can be grateful and still know your worth. Those ideas, they're not in conflict. They actually belong together. Now, here's something else I noticed. Women are incredible at recognizing greatness in other women. Tell us your friend earned a doctorate and we celebrate. Tell us she launched a business and we're going to all cheer. Tell us she got promoted and we'll applaud. Tell us she bought her first investment property and we'll tell her how proud we are. But ask us to describe ourselves and suddenly the language changes. Oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. Or I got lucky. I still have so much to learn. It wasn't anything special. Really? Then why would you never say that to your best friend? Why is your kindness reserved for everyone except yourself? Now, I want you to think about that because sometimes the person standing between you and your next level, it's not your boss. It isn't the economy. It's not your circumstances. It's the story you've been telling yourself. The story that says, what I do isn't that important. And if you believe that, every decision after that becomes smaller. You'll negotiate smaller, dream smaller, lead smaller, charge smaller, invest smaller, live smaller, not because you have less ability, because you've accepted a smaller definition of yourself. This episode is brought to you by the Financial Feminism community. If today's conversation is making you think differently about your own value, you're exactly the kind of woman we created this community for. Financial Feminism is more than a podcast. It's a movement helping women recognize their value, strengthen their financial confidence, build wealth, embrace technology, and create opportunities for themselves and the generations that follow. You don't have to figure it out alone. Join us and connect with women who are building businesses, advancing careers, and refusing to play small. Visit ownthepurse.com to learn more. Welcome back. Before the break, I asked you to think about something. What if the greatest obstacle between where you are and where you want to be isn't your education, isn't your experience, or your opportunities? What if it's the way you've been valuing yourself? Because here's what I've learned. Money doesn't always follow talent. It follows perceived value. Think about that. There are brilliant women making half of what they should. There are women with decades of experience who still hesitate before applying for leadership positions. And there are women running businesses who apologize before they tell someone their price. Also, there's women with incredible ideas that never become businesses because they've convinced themselves that someone else was more qualified. And I've seen it in healthcare, I've seen it in business, I've seen it in ministry, and I've seen it in nonprofit organizations, and I've even seen it in women sitting around conference tables who had the best idea in the room and never said a word. And it wasn't because they weren't intelligent, but because they questioned themselves before they ever opened their mouths. And I want you to imagine something. Imagine walking into an antique store. There's this old chair that's there, and it's just sitting there in the corner, and someone walks by it every single day. To them, it's just an old chair. I mean, it's woven, it's dusty, it's ordinary. And then one day, an appraiser walks in. And he studies it. He looks underneath, he examines, the craftsmanship, and he says, this chair is worth $50,000. Did that chair suddenly become valuable? No, it always was. The only thing that changed was someone's understanding of its value. And ladies, how many of us are that chair? We've spent years believing we're ordinary, not because we are, because we've never stopped long enough to recognize what we've actually become. And I think about the woman who has spent 25 years managing chaos inside of a hospital. Do you know what she's actually learned? Leadership, conflict resolution, critical thinking, operations, crisis management, communication, even decision-making under pressure. She doesn't call it that. She says, I'm just a nurse. No, you're running one of the most complex environments in the world. You've just become so good at it that it no longer impresses you. Or I tell you what, think about the mother. And people love to minimize motherhood, but let's be honest. You're managing schedules, budgets, conflict for sure, nutrition, transportation, education, emotional regulation, long-term planning, negotiation, and healthcare and time management. Now tell me another executive person that requires all of that every single day. Yet, how many mothers describe themselves by saying, oh, I'm just a stay-at-home mom? That word again, just. So can I challenge you today? Take that word completely out of your vocabulary. Every time you're about to say, I'm just, stop. Start over. Listen to how different these sound. I'm just helping. No. I'm leading this project. I'm just a small business. No. I'm building a company. Oh, I'm just learning. No. I'm investing in my future. Words matter because words become beliefs, and then beliefs become actions, and then actions become habits, and habits become lives. If you continue speaking about yourself as though you're small, eventually you'll believe that you're small, and then you'll make small decisions. And one of the things that changed my life wasn't earning another degree. It was changing the questions I asked myself. Instead of asking, am I qualified enough? I started asking, what problems can I solve? And that's a completely different conversation. Women spend too much time qualifying themselves. And the marketplace rewards people who solves problems. Let me say that again because I hope you never forget it. The marketplace rewards people who solve problems, not people with perfect resumes, not people that have the most confidence, not even the smartest people in the room, but people who solve meaningful problems. So instead of focusing on what you don't have, start really paying attention to what you've already solved. How many difficult conversations have you navigated? How many teams have you held together? And how many families have you cared for? How many people have you encouraged? How many impossible situations have you survived? Those aren't random life experiences. They're assets. Every single one of them. And I think women have been taught to collect accomplishments without ever taking inventory. So imagine owning a warehouse that's filled with priceless treasures and never walking inside. And that's why so many women, we have this issue. That's what we're doing. We have years of wisdom. We have years of resilience and leadership, years of experience and years of relationships and years of lessons. Yet you still introduce yourself to people as though you've done nothing remarkable. Financial feminism asks a different question. Instead of asking, what don't I have? We ask, what have I already built? Because wealth doesn't begin with money. It begins with recognizing assets. And some assets are in your bank account. Others are sitting between your ears. Some are in your network. Some may be in your reputation. Some are in your character. Some are even in your experience. And the problem is, we've only been taught to count one kind of asset, money. But successful women understand something different. Your financial life grows much faster once you learn to recognize the value you already possess. And I remember a while back talking to a woman who wanted to start a consulting business. And she had 28 years of experience. 28. And she had trained hundreds of employees. She led departments. She solved operational problems. She monitored leaders and in their work. She created systems. She mentored people. And when I asked her what she thought she could charge, she gave me a number that honestly surprised me. And it was incredibly low. So I asked her why. And her answer, it broke my heart. And her answer was, I don't think anyone would pay more. Not because they wouldn't, but because she had already decided that her experience wasn't worth it. Now, how many women are leaving money on the table not because people refuse to pay, but because they've already discounted themselves before the conversation even begins? That's why this movement exists. Not to convince women they're capable. Most already are. It's to help them recognize that they've been overlooking something. Because once you begin to see yourself differently, everything begins to change.
Meet Snip Ninja, your professional media team on demand. Simply upload your raw footage or audio, choose your services, and let our expert ninjas handle the rest. Receive stunning edits, professional podcasts, and engaging clips fast. From viral clips to full podcast production, we help you cut through the noise and connect with your audience. It's more than just editing. It's about empowering your passion, because when you thrive, we thrive. Join a community of creators achieving their goals faster. Ready to level up your content? Visit snipninja.com today.
Welcome back. Before we close today, I want to leave you with something practical. Not theory, not motivation, not another quote that you're going to forget tomorrow morning. I want to leave you with an exercise, because I believe transformation happens when we stop listening for a moment and just start reflecting. So wherever you are, if you can safely do this later today, grab a notebook, not your phone and not a notes app, an actual notebook. And at the top of the page, I want you to write one question. What have I been treating as ordinary that's actually extraordinary? And then stick with that question for a minute and just sit there for a bit. Don't rush, because I think you're going to surprise yourself. Write down 5 things that you've accomplished that are not degrees, that are not promotions, and that are not titles, just life. And maybe you rebuilt your life after a divorce. Maybe you survived cancer. Maybe you survived abuse. Maybe you cared for a parent until their very last breath. And maybe you raised children while working full time. Maybe you paid off debt or started over after losing everything. Maybe you moved across the country knowing no one, or started a business with nothing more than an idea and faith. Maybe you've spent years quietly serving your community without anyone noticing. So write those things down. Now read them slowly. And here's my next question. If another woman handed you that exact same list, would you admire her? Would you respect her? Would you tell her she's resilient or that she's strong? Would you tell her she's capable? Of course you would. Then why are you so reluctant to say those same things about yourself? Why is compassion so easy to give away and so difficult to receive? And I think many women have confused humility with invisibility. They're not the same thing. Humility doesn't mean pretending. It doesn't mean that your gifts don't exist. Humility simply means recognizing where those gifts came from while using them to serve others. There's nothing humble about hiding, and there's nothing humble about refusing opportunities because you're afraid someone might think you're confident. There's nothing humble about staying silent when your experience could change someone else's life. And I want to say something to the woman who's listening today and feel like, hey, I'm behind. Maybe you're 40, maybe you're 50, maybe you're 60. Maybe you think you missed your opportunity. And I like to just lovingly challenge that. Who decided there was an expiration date on your potential? Who told you that leadership belongs only to younger women? Who convinced you that starting over is embarrassing? Some of the most remarkable women I've ever met didn't discover their purpose into the second half of their lives. They weren't late, they were becoming. And sometimes life has to prepare you before it positions you. Sometimes your greatest qualification isn't what you've learned, it's what you've survived. And that's something no classroom can teach. You know, one of the things I love most about women is our ability to see potential in other people. We can look at someone who's struggling and say, I believe in you. We encourage our children, we mentor younger women, we coach friends throughout difficult seasons. We remind everyone around us that they're capable. But then we walk into the bathroom, look in the mirror, and become our harshest critic. Could you imagine what would happen if you spoke to yourself the way that you speak to the women that you love? Instead of saying, I'm not ready, you'd say, you've prepared for this. Instead of saying, I don't know enough, you'd say, guess what? You'll keep learning. And instead of saying, what if I fail? You'll say, what if this changes everything? That shift changes lives. Not overnight, but one decision at a time. One conversation at a time. One opportunity at a time. And financial feminism isn't asking women to become something they're not. It's asking women to stop hiding who they've already become. And that's a very different mission. This movement isn't about making women aggressive. It's about making women aware of their gifts and their influence and their leadership, aware of their financial potential, aware that they have far more to offer than they've been led to believe. And awareness changes everything, because once you recognize your value, you negotiate differently. You interview differently. You lead differently. You invest differently. You build differently. You parent differently. You dream differently. And you stop asking yourself for permission to become who you've already been called to be. And that's what happened to me. The doctorate didn't suddenly make me valuable. It simply forced me to stop long enough to recognize the value that had been growing through every difficult season. Those long nights and the failures and all the setbacks and the sacrifices, none of them were wasted, and neither are yours. So before we finish today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Imagine if every woman listening to this podcast truly understood her value. Imagine if she negotiated the salary, started the business, applied for the leadership position, invested in herself, mentored other women, stopped apologizing for taking up space. Imagine the impact on families, on workplaces, on communities, on generations. And that's why this movement matters. Because financial feminism has never been just about money. Money is simply one expression of value. The real mission is ownership. Ownership of your gifts. Ownership of your voice. Ownership of your future, of your decisions, of your opportunities. Ownership of your life. And here's what I hope you'll remember after today's episode. The marketplace cannot consistently value what you refuse to value yourself. So don't wait for another degree. Don't wait for another promotion. Don't wait until someone finally tells you you're enough. Because if you're waiting for permission, you may be waiting forever. So give it to yourself today, right now. And if this conversation spoke to you, I'd love to ask one favor. Share this episode with one woman, just one. Your sister, your daughter, your coworker, your friend, your mentor. Someone who has forgotten just how extraordinary she really is. Because movements don't grow through algorithms. They grow through conversations. And if enough women begin to recognize their value, we won't just change individual bank accounts. We're going to change families and boardrooms and businesses and communities. We'll change what the next generation of girls believe is possible. So thank you for spending this time with me today. If today's episode challenged you, encouraged you, or simply made you think a little differently, I'd love to have you continue this journey with us. So visit ownthepurse.com, join the Financial Feminism community, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Until next time, know your value, own your value, and never let anyone, including yourself, convince you that you are just anything, because you never were.
Financial feminism, ownership, income, freedom. Financial feminism, more options, more ownership, more freedom.